For over 2 decades, her brutal murder remained unsolved. Then, a breakthrough in DNA technology brought justice to Sherry Holtz. In 1999, 50-year-old Sherry Holtz was found murdered in a wooded area in Sanford, Florida. Her case went cold for over 24 years, but in 2023, advancements in DNA testing led to the arrest of her former boyfriend, Gary Durrance, who was charged with second-degree homicide. Sherry Holtz was a 50-year-old woman living in Sanford, Florida. Described by her friends as warm and loving, Sherry had a complicated history with her longtime boyfriend, Gary Durrance. They had been together for years, but the relationship had been marred by frequent arguments and violent episodes, which escalated in the months leading to Sherry's murder. On the evening of December 4, 1999, Sherry was last seen leaving her apartment, reportedly to meet Gary at a local bar. Sherry was known to have gone through a rough patch in her relationship with Gary, and their heated arguments often made their interactions strained. That night, Sherry never returned home. Her family immediately began to worry. 2 days later, her body was discovered by a passing jogger in a dense, wooded area on the outskirts of Sanford, Florida. Her body showed signs of severe trauma, including blunt force injuries and stab wounds. Investigators arrived at the crime scene, noting that there were no witnesses and nothing seemed to be stolen from her. Despite a thorough investigation, the case soon went cold as there was little to no evidence connecting anyone to the crime. Sherry's family was left devastated, unable to understand who could have committed such a violent crime. Though Gary was initially a person of interest, there was no definitive proof to link him to her death. The case seemed to fade into the background of unsolved cold cases in Florida.
For years, Sherry's family struggled with the grief of losing a loved one, with no answers or closure. Law enforcement officers continued to revisit the case periodically, but the lack of solid evidence stunted their progress. The investigation went through various phases, from testing forensic evidence to interviewing witnesses, but every lead ended up as a dead end. Gary Durrance, Sherry's boyfriend at the time of her death, was questioned multiple times as he had a history of violent altercations with Sherry. Neighbors reported hearing loud arguments between the couple in the days before Sherry's death, but Gary maintained his innocence. He told police he had no idea what happened to Sherry, and without further evidence or eyewitnesses, law enforcement was forced to move on to other theories. The case slowly slipped into the category of cold cases, and the search for Sherry's killer seemed to stall indefinitely. Her family, while still hopeful, grew increasingly disheartened, knowing that the murder might never be solved. Yet, as time passed, Sherry's loved ones never gave up hope. Every year, on the anniversary of Sherry's death, her family would gather and light a candle in her memory, hoping that one day the truth would come to light.
In 2023, the Sanford Police Department decided to revisit Sherry's case. With advancements in forensic science, particularly in DNA analysis, investigators hoped that re-examining the old evidence with newer techniques could provide answers. One of the key pieces of evidence that had been preserved from the original crime scene was a blood-stained knife found near Sherry's body. Although it had been examined in 1999, there were no usable DNA profiles at the time. However, with the recent advances in forensic technology, the Sanford Police Department sent the knife for re-examination. The knife was retested, and DNA samples were successfully extracted from the blood on the blade and the handle. The blood on the blade was confirmed to be Sherry's. However, what made the case break wide open was the DNA recovered from the handle. It was a match for Gary Durrance, Sherry's former boyfriend. The breakthrough sent shockwaves through the community, as police now had the conclusive evidence they needed to arrest Gary.
It was the DNA evidence that finally linked him to Sherry's murder, something that was missing during the original investigation. Detectives revisited old witness statements and interviewed people who had known Gary and Sherry, confirming that their relationship had been tumultuous and violent. Several new witnesses came forward with crucial information, including people who had witnessed Gary acting suspiciously the night Sherry went missing. The arrest of Gary Durrance was a relief to Sherry's family, who had waited over 2 decades for justice.
As Gary Durrance was arrested and brought into custody, the case rapidly gained attention from local news outlets. His history of domestic violence and his connection to the victim raised alarms within the Sanford community, and many were shocked to learn that Gary, who had seemed like an innocent bystander, was involved in the murder. Gary was charged with second-degree murder, and as his trial date approached, prosecutors continued to build their case, presenting the newly recovered DNA evidence, witness testimonies, and a history of violent behavior. Many of Sherry's friends and family members recalled moments when Gary had been aggressive towards Sherry, and several witnesses testified that they had seen him in the area the night of her murder. There was no denying that Gary had been present at the scene. Sherry's family members expressed a mix of relief and anger as they watched Gary face charges for the death of their loved one. They were finally getting the closure they had longed for, but were still haunted by the years of grief and uncertainty. The prosecution made it clear that Gary had acted out of anger, but defense attorneys attempted to present a different narrative. Gary's defense team argued that there was not enough evidence to convict him beyond a reasonable doubt, despite the DNA evidence and witness testimony.
Just as the case seemed to be heading toward a conviction, a surprising twist occurred. Gary's defense team managed to find a small gap in the prosecution's case, questioning the chain of custody of some of the evidence. They argued that the DNA samples could have been contaminated or mishandled. The defense also claimed that Sherry's murder could have been the result of a third party, and that Gary's DNA had somehow ended up on the knife due to unknown circumstances. The defense team attempted to throw doubt on the prosecution's entire case, and for a moment it seemed like Gary might avoid a conviction. This twist caught everyone off guard and threw the case into uncertainty, but the prosecution stood firm, reaffirming that the DNA evidence and the witness testimonies were conclusive proof of Gary's guilt.
Despite the defense's attempt to cast doubt on the evidence, the jury ultimately sided with the prosecution. After weeks of deliberation, the jury found Gary Durrance guilty of second-degree murder. The DNA evidence had proven crucial in securing the conviction, and the jury was convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Gary had killed Sherry Holtz. The verdict was met with a mix of relief and sadness from Sherry's family, who had endured years of uncertainty. The moment they had been waiting for finally arrived: justice for Sherry.
Although Sherry's family felt relief that her killer had been brought to justice, the emotional toll of losing her remained. They knew that nothing could bring her back, but they were grateful that Gary Durrance was finally being held accountable for his actions. Sherry's case served as a reminder of the importance of advancements in forensic science, especially DNA technology, in solving cold cases. Sherry's murder had gone unsolved for decades, but thanks to modern science, the truth finally came to light. If you have any information on unsolved cases in your community, please reach out to your local authorities. Your tip could be the key to solving a case and bringing justice to victims and their families. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice and closure. Your support helps us bring awareness to cold cases and share stories that deserve to be told.